So that's really what we're going to focus on. We're going to talk about how to quantify that information, so how it's actually going to help you in your organisations. So I'm going to take you on a little journey. This will be a history lesson, I'll try and go quite quickly. But like I said, I've been set up the MG in 2013, and initially it was just 4 of us, and we were doing stuff. Right, we were literally doing stuff. So we were like a collection of contractors. We might do a little bit of implementation work, we might do a little bit of like TMS work, like fixing some TMS stuff. We even had our own, or tried to, we tried to build our own SaaS product as well, in terms of the way it would extract data out of, actually Discover. We were talking about this at lunch. Take data out of Discover, which was Adobe's reporting tool, which was, far fancier than it actually was in terms of its capability, and sort of build a solution around that. And it was great stuff that we were doing, but there was no strategy to anything that we were doing at all. So we just kind of trundled along for a few years, working hard but never really getting anywhere. And then it kind of all changed. Right, 2016 there was a big change, and then you can see actually what happened to the company from 2016 and up to now, what I'm forecasting for 2025. I haven't put the actual numbers in here. If you want to know the numbers, talk to me later. But really what happened there is we actually managed to create a robust company. We actually managed to be able to convey the value of what we were doing to our clients, to our prospects, and actually grow to a significant organisation. And a few months ago, I actually completed the successful sale of that organisation, or 51% of that organisation, to Havas Media, a massive global organisation, and we are now the centre of excellence inside of Havas globally for everything digital data collection and data activation. Right, so these bars should go up even further from here, and maybe I'll stop buying my shorts from next. So it's going well. So I'm going to just take you through that, sort of how we did that, and then let's look at applying that to specifically to ObservePoint as well, how ObservePoint has played a role in that journey as well, and how it's going to continue to play a role in that journey. What's quite exciting about this particular graph is that there's one person in the room who actually was part of the journey from 2016, or certainly at 2016, and was one of the people that put their faith in me and my organisation to help us grow that, which is David. So yeah, thank you for that. Put your hand up, David. Yeah, right, there you go. Yes. Little did he know we were just making it up as we go along. So, what did we do? Well, the first thing we did is we focused on the data. As I said, we were doing stuff, we were doing a lot of implementation work, a bit of analytics, a bit of Google Analytics, but we didn't have any strategy to it. And actually what we realised is that, look, the value of the data that we are working with is huge. If we can associate the data activation capabilities with the data collection capabilities, we can then quantify everything that we are doing. So everything that we're doing from the data layer design, so to actual data layer design, from the implementation, which we call data collect, so everything we're doing inside of the TMS, all the analytics implementation, and then from a data inform, all the insight that we're actually supporting our customers to do. We can structure that and quantify that in all of those activation capabilities. So how are we using that for testing and optimization? How are we using that to personalize experiences? How are we using that to automate journeys and sort of automate experience journeys throughout the entire customer's life cycle? We can actually quantify that, and therefore when we go and talk to our prospects and our customers, we're not just saying, oh yeah, we can fix your implementation. No, what we're going to say is, well actually look, if we fixed your implementation to this level, it will allow you to create X million of incremental revenue, right? That was more interesting. And something I've noticed just this morning, and I noticed a lot with ObservePoint, is that there's a lot of talk around things that you can do, consent management and journeys and kind of alerts and all that kind of stuff. And it's brilliant, absolutely fantastic. But what's the point? Well, what is that monetary value that is associated with that, right? Because if you don't have that, you're probably just going to get a lot of glazed looks on your face when you go and try and get a sign off for this, right? I don't know if that's familiar with you in the room, but certainly if you just go off on a technical tangent, to a budget holder, they're probably just going to give you a bit of a blank look, right? When you start talking about, well, actually, no, we can make £10 million of extra incremental revenue. Okay, I'm listening, yeah? So that's what we did in 2016. 2019, we hired a lot of people. By 2019, we were hiring a lot of people, right? We knew what we were doing, but we needed people to do it, right? And it's the same that's true about ObservePoint. I think one of the challenges is that you've got all that functionality and capability within the tool, but you need to think about the people that are actually creating it, right? And then maintaining it. You can't just set it up and hope for the best and hope it's going to continue to add value. You've got to think about how to structure your people around utilizing that tool and continuing to get the most value out of it. And that's what we did by 2019, is we figured out, look, we need to have an organization structure. We can't just be a bunch of people doing some clever things with data. We need to be thinking about what everyone's role is and what they're going to contribute and how they're going to be adding value. And in 2022, we've got clear focus on what our approach to data is going to be. We've got people to do it, but we're not efficient with it. We need to have standards, we need to have frameworks, we need to have policies in place, right? So we're actually going to have standard ways of delivering consulting projects. We're going to actually build our own customer activation framework, which is a bit like a maturity framework, but actually works, not like the rubbish you get from Accenture or Deloitte, right? It's actually going to work. How are we going to take our customers through that, and how are we going to show them how they are going to be continually adding value to their businesses going through this maturity framework, right? And all sorts of other stuff, including HR policies, which I love. I love an HR policy. But like I say, by this point, by 2023, it got us to a point where, in 2022, we started to become really interesting for acquisition, right? And after a number of years, eventually decided to exit to Havas, to be part of that, to create that center of excellence, to be able to do this globally for thousands of customers. And what we're looking at now, this is a busy slide, but what we're looking at now is how are we actually going to scale this, right? Because we need a very, very comprehensive strategy for every aspect of data as it flows through a journey for a customer. We need to figure out, right, how for each organization, what is going to be their data strategy? How ready are they for it? What are their use cases? How are their teams set up? What is the execution plan, right? And these are the kind of like audit type bits of information that we can use ObservePoint for to support us doing this. Then we need to actually make sure that the data is implemented across the various touch points to get it through, that it is consistent, that it is of high quality, right? That we're monitoring everything that's coming through. Otherwise, it's going to break the system, right? It's going to devalue the system. So we're looking at integrating ObservePoint into every aspect of what we're doing from a data collection standpoint. From our kind of engineering, our sources, our schemas, making sure that we've got the data being structured correctly, right? And Andre, you gave a great example of some, ways in which we can monitor this and ensure that the standards are kept. Well, absolutely, right? Because if we lose that, it's going to break all of our profile, all of our unified profile tracking, right? Governance as well. If we mess this up, we might be subject to fines, or we might just piss the customer off. So we're going to make sure we keep to that. How this actually then plays out in terms of the customer's journey, being able to monitor that, see all of the different error stages that they might have. If we're investing, or if the company's investing hundreds of millions in terms of advertising, we need to make sure that's working all the way through, right? And all the way through to the actual end application of how the experience is delivered to the customer, and then exporting the data out or analysing it inside the system. But more likely, we're going to export it out, actually put it into their own BI systems and be able to have a centralised reporting tool for our customers. So that's what we're now building, right, for handling this at global scale. And what we're trying to do is trying to help customers understand the importance of having this data strategy. It's no longer good enough to just do some clever things with data. You need to be thinking about every aspect of that data and what the implication is for the customer to be able to give them the journey that they expect, and make sure that the information you have to be able to personalize that journey is robust, right? And that's that's one of the key points that ObservePoint is going to allow us to do. So how did this sort of manifest? Because it all sounds maybe like I'm making it up, but it's not. Right? How is this manifested in terms of example case studies? So for example, we've got three kind of different levels of maturity here. So the first case study I wanted to give you and how BMW, or how it was used at BMW, this is for the dealership sites. So here, what we managed to do was actually use ObservePoint in a way that allowed us to implement and validate an Adobe Analytics implementation across 318 different domains in 3 months. Like you cannot do that manually. It's just not possible, right? We were able to actually get a lot more data coming through and a lot more accurate data coming through. But ultimately, what we're talking about in terms of like quantification of value here, right, is we reduced their QA time by 85%, right? So we're talking about, for them, in this particular implementation, we saved them hundreds of thousands of pounds in implementation costs and QA costs, definitely compared to the other agencies they were talking to. And that, that was a huge win for us to be able to say that for BMW, right? So that's just one example of how that was used. We've got Shutterfly here as well, so this is one of our North American customers. Now for these guys, they're a pure play business, so everything they do is online advertising, and they spend hundreds of millions, about 100 million or so dollars a year on their digital advertising. And what we're able to do here is set up a bunch of monitoring on all of their critical marketing tags. So in this particular instance, what we're able to do is we can massively reduce the amount of time to diagnose issues, right? Because every single minute for them is lost, hundreds of thousands of dollars in terms of the performance tracking they get from their advertising tags. So this, again, is a huge cost saving that we're able to give Shutterfly by putting in automation into and starting to do the critical monitoring. So I think Eve was talking about kind of regular auditing, sort of cyclical auditing. It's that kind of process that is put in place for Shutterfly to add the value here. And then the third one, massive global airline. What we're doing here is that literally everything is set up and automated. So particularly what we're talking about is journeys, so priority booking journeys. Okay, so you can imagine for an airline, they've got very specific critical paths that they want their customers to go through in that booking journey. So what we've done there is set up those critical paths, and it's continually monitored. Again, someone else was speaking about continual monitoring. Andre, it might have been you, I can't remember now, Eve or Andre. But yeah, just to give validation to that. Obviously, that is a huge thing, because you've kind of got a bit of a moment with a customer to convert that booking. All right, when they get partway through the flow, they don't want to fall off of that flow because the price might change. Right, people know that. So being able to keep an eye on that, make sure there's no issues, and if there is an issue, you can jump on that immediately. It's a huge value to this airline. So, coming back to kind of like how to think about how to quantify this, right? Like I say, I'm going to give you the view from a consultancy. Yes, I was client side, but I'm going to give you a view from the consultancy, because for the last 11 years, I've had to justify everything that I do, right? When we talk to prospects or customers, they're either initially skeptical of what I might try and sell them, or if we are working with them, they've probably got a budget assigned to us, and they need to always be saying, well, is that consultancy continuing to drive value for us? And we've always got to have a good answer for that. Definitely a few nods from that over there, yeah. Feel my pain. We've always got to justify that, so we've always got to make sure that we do actually understand the value we're delivering. And I think this is really important for you, if you're practitioners, to be able to help you explain exactly the value of what you are doing with this tool as well. So we've broken this down into three areas, sort of three key areas, which we think are most important. The data quality, the performance, and the governance. And each one of these is a slightly different way in which you quantify value. But just to clarify, so by data quality, we're talking about how is my data layer loading? Have I got missing variables? Have I got missing tags? Right? Am I actually missing any of the data? Is any of it incorrect? Right? That's what I mean by data quality. By performance, we're talking about things like load times, page load times, first content render, that kind of stuff. And then governance is around compliance, right? So are we compliant with all of the correct regulation in a particular country? Questionable for a lot of brands, but it's also, are we compliant with our own rules? right? Because a lot of different brands will have different interpretations of privacy regulations and what they should opt into and what should be opted out of. Everyone is a little bit different, and that's fine because it's a risk profile that company take. It's a conscious choice they've made on that particular risk profile. So what I'm saying here is I'm not saying, look, what you should be doing is using ObservePoint to say, right, well, actually, for the letter of the law, we should be doing exactly this. It's not really our job to do that, right? That I feel is the job of the legal team to decide that on a per company basis. But whatever that policy is that is created, it is our job to make sure we actually stick to it, right? We don't accidentally break it. So in terms of the data accuracy, right, a couple of things that kind of fall out from that in terms of the things that you can quantify value. Number one, cookie resilience. And what I'm talking about here is thinking about, how are those cookies being set from? What domains are they being set from? Right? How accurate is the data? What data is being set? And the value of that actually is fairly easy to quantify. In that, if you're running, say, a third-party cookie, you can actually see what through what browsers are being used, what the likelihood is of that third-party cookie being declined by a customer, right? And you can kind of put a value associated with that. But even first-party cookies, you can start to say, well, if we're running a JavaScript first-party cookie versus an HTTP cookie, well, what is the level of resilience of that? Well, this JavaScript cookie, I might have a 1 to 7 day window in which I can look back and actually see people's behavior and connect it together. But that's it. And if I go for an HTTP cookie, I've got a much bigger window. If I've got a much bigger window, my attribution reporting for my marketing performance is going to be that much more accurate. If it's that much more accurate, what does that mean for my media optimization? I might be able to have like a 15% higher sort of match rate on my media optimization. I've got a £100 million pound budget or £10 million budget. You can get a number out of that, right? It's the kind of thing that we've been able to do with customers by switching them to HTTP cookies and actually saying, look, we can see the sort of before and after what the difference is in the quality of the data you're getting, and actually put a number against it as to what that's contributing towards, say, marketing efficiency. The data collection accuracy, as I mentioned, is about possibly missing data layer values or incorrect data layer values. Well, this one really sort of speaks to what you're doing from a data activation perspective. So if you're doing A/B testing, you've got a CRO plan, you've got a personalization plan, the likelihood is that all of those activities will have incremental revenue numbers associated with them, right? Because when you're doing that test, you've got a control that you're doing that test against. Well, actually, if you're unable to run an activity, or unable to run an optimization activity, or unable to run a personalization activity, you can start to quantify what that means to you, right? Because if you've got a certain drop-off in a flow, where you've got a conversion rate that's lower than it should be, you can start to put a number against that and say, look, if we can actually have the ability to target customers in this way, we are forecasting it will have a X% uplift, right? Put a number against that. And then actually when you do it, come back and validate that number, right? And be able to prove to anyone who's working on this project that actually, look, that time and effort we put into that collection accuracy has led to 5 million, whatever it is, 1 million, 2 million of incremental revenue that we've been able to prove. And then say critical path automation. Now, whether we're talking about ObservePoint or we're just talking about generally in a business, it's really important to understand those critical paths, right? What is the value of each of those critical paths? If you've got a key flow that you're trying to send customers through, if they don't make it through that flow, for whatever reason, what is that worth to you, right? What is that loss of sale? What is that loss of revenue actually, what would it amount to if it were to occur? Compare that to the cost of maybe some a bit of additional cervical volume from ObservePoint, and I'm pretty sure it's going to massively outweigh that cost for sure, right? But again, you can put a number against that. If you know what your conversion rates are, you know what your average order values are, you can put numbers against these things. In terms of the performance, so that, like I said, that's around sort of web vitals, tag performance, any errors, things like loading slowly. So here what we're doing is we can go and diagnose and prioritize the issues. We can have a look, and you've seen, I think there was a demonstration on how to kind of filter this by the level of impact on the business, right? How you then quantify that is around actually sort of making, there's going to be a lot of common themes here, but around actually testing this, right? So it's not necessarily the case that you look at your site and say, right, well, we've got these tags loading and it's taking 7 seconds to load, and 7 seconds we think is bad. Well, it's not quite that simple, because you've got to look at what's expected of the industry, what's going on your site, the value of the components on that site. But you can start to test all this stuff. If you've got a testing tool and you've got a plan in place to kind of feed this into a sort of prioritized roadmap for all of your data activation strategy, it's the kind of thing that you can work with your engineering team to start playing around with, rather than trying to come up with a number that you think is relevant for site performance. Well, have different versions of how a page loads and test it, see what happens, right? Put a number against it, rather than having a constant argument as to, well, but run the test. That will tell you. It will tell you specifically for your business, and it will tell you specifically for different customer types in your business. That will give you the answer. And then what you can do is you can align that internally and have a continuous kind of benchmark, and a benchmark that actually makes sense to your business, right? That's the important bit. Is don't necessarily think about it as an industry benchmark. It's a benchmark for your business. And then on the governance side, right, well, yes, we can talk about fines and the potential implication of fines, but I don't know if anyone has actually looked through any of the kind of case law that's come out. There hasn't been a lot of it, but I don't know, has anyone actually looked at the case law that's come out where people have received fines? Anyone bedtime reading? No? Yeah, it's pretty dry. But when you look, when I've looked through those, the kind of key message has always been fairly consistent in there, in that yes, they haven't been compliant, obviously, but actually what is quite consistent in there is that they've never actually bothered to be compliant. So what we're saying here is it's not the case that the governance capability is, if you start working with it, just going to automatically void you of any possibility of getting a fine. No, what we're saying here is that actually making the effort to have a consent policy, make sure that you are, at least in your organization, you think you're compliant, and then having systems controls in place to adhere to that policy, that is likely to put you in a much better position should something go wrong, right? It's not a guarantee, but it's the kind of thing that you need to be having in place. You need to at least be trying to not just one time think you can set up a consent policy and be okay, but actually continually monitoring that and making sure that you do adhere to that, especially if you are working with a lot of third parties, right? There could be a lot of scripts that are going on in there, a lot of conflicting rules that occur. That's one of the most common things we see, is conflicting rules, and therefore people not realizing that in certain conditions consent is not actually being adhered to. So yeah, that could have a value to it, could be the level of the fines, but I think it's about making sure you stick to your own actual governance plan. And then, yeah, just thinking about the future, I just thought it'd be interesting for those in the room, just to give a bit of credibility, not that you need it necessarily for ObservePoint, but in terms of how we're looking to the future, what we're looking to do is actually integrate the ObservePoint tool, mostly through the API integrations, into basically everything that is done for all customers inside of Havas. So when we are working with any of the thousands of customers globally inside of Havas, we're going to start looking at a kind of data maturity framework for them, and actually using ObservePoint to fuel a lot of the data that is utilized for that, and therefore also trying to, and this is a little bit ambitious, but we'll do it anyway, trying to set a global standard for how you should be using data and how you should be monitoring continually that data to ensure that you can always get the greatest value from it. That's what we are looking to do over the next sort of coming months and years. So I thought, yeah, might be interesting. Yeah, so then just to kind of like wrap this up a little bit, to give you another couple of examples of sort of how this is in play. So I mentioned earlier on our digital customer activation framework. These are the kind of levels that we go through. with our customers, right? So whether they're at the kind of initiate stage and they've really, right at the beginning, they don't necessarily have a data layer, all the way up to that kind of leader stage where they've got, a fully scaled activation program, all utilizing first-party data, loads of automation, et cetera, and anything in between. We're trying to always push them up in that direction, right? But as an example of how we're using ObservePoint and weaving ObservePoint into this, as an example, for a customer who's at the build stage, so they've kind of got a relatively basic data layer, starting to get a more complete marketing tech stack in place. So we'd be using ObservePoint here, more so for kind of one-off data validations. So this is likely using our own partner license to do kind of one-off validations of their data to kind of really start to educate them on the importance of having this kind of tool in place and this kind of process in place. And that's really sort of then getting them to think about what they need to have as they grow and as they mature and as they scale. If they're at that point of scale, then we're starting to talk to them about actually either having or utilizing better their own license for this and starting to build automations into this, such as the critical path of the audits, right? That's where we are now actually funneling this into all of our client opportunities, all of our client delivery we've got. So yeah, closing points, just to sort of finish this off. So, what are my takeaways? All right, yeah. Thanks, Graham. Number one, don't crash your bike into a rocky ditch. It hurts. And your bike will be smashed into pieces like mine. Very, very important. That's the most important takeaway you should take from today. Number two, never, ever let Mike start talking about cookies. He will actually never finish. So if you're looking forward to the tuk-tuk thing, you're going to have to cut him off at some point. He's going to keep going. He's just going to keep going. He's not even denying it. But number three is this. It's how much money am I saving or making my company using ObservePoint, right? If you can quantify that, that is going to allow you to actually really add value to your organization. And like I say, it's going to let you add value to your careers as well, right? Always thinking about that value that you can drive back. It's allowed me to take a company from a rabble of 4 people to now 50 people, right? How you apply that in your organization to you, it is going to massively change your careers, I think, as well. And that's it.